Okay, it looks like we are live. I'll just give it a second because I know there's always a lag with these things. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from in the world today, and whichever time zone you're in. It's late afternoon here where I am, and I was just saying to our participants that it might get dark, so I might have to switch lighting on, but it's so lovely, that beautiful late afternoon sunlight. I'm Jane Bullen, Managing Director of Nutrition Network, and I'm joined by two incredible lecturers on our new training that we are launching and publishing at the end of this month, and that is Michelle Hearn, RD, and Daria Green. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so, so much for being here. And in particular, thank you for the beautiful work and lectures that you present and the beautiful journey that you share, work that you embody. We're going to, of course, spend this time that we've got together talking about that and going into more detail about it. I'm going to introduce you both first and then give you a chance to correct me or whatever it is that it takes. But so Daria, we'll start with you. Daria Green is a food addiction professional and a functional medicine health coach. And in this training that Metabolism in the Mind, Daria's topic is approaching a client with an addiction disorder. Daria is a food addiction professional and functional health coach dedicated to helping individuals reclaim their health and well-being. With a deep understanding of the complexities of food addiction, Daria empowers her clients to break free from harmful eating patterns and establish a nourishing relationship with food. Her approach integrates the principles of functional medicine, which seeks to address the root causes of health issues and promotes holistic healing. With a passionate and personalized approach, Daria guides her clients through dietary and lifestyle changes that support their unique health goals. She understands the challenges of overcoming food addiction and provides the tools, support, and encouragement needed for long-lasting transformation. Through her work, she aims to inspire and educate others on the profound impacts of nutrition on overall health and vitality. You're also studying medicine at the moment, is that correct, Daria? And going more and more into the psychiatry route, of my understanding. So
Correct. Thank you for the presentation. Yes, I'm in the medical school at the moment to become a doctor, psychiatrist, and addiction specialist, addiction medicine doctor. And I'm honored to be a part of this discussion. It is an emerging field, metabolic psychiatry, and I would be delighted to bring some of the functional medicine into the conversation and approach a client and discussion about clients' health from the holistic point of view.
amazing. Thank you so much. And Daria, I met Daria at Swiss Re Food for Thought event last year in Switzerland and was just really, really struck by the absolute expansive knowledge and kind of qualifications and energy that you've put into, as I would say, an early adopter of the understanding of the role of addiction and metabolic disease. And we're going to get into that a bit later. And I'm looking forward to hearing your journey and your story of how you put the pieces of the puzzle together so early on. Let me introduce you, Michelle, before we get too far into this live. So Michelle Hearn is a dedicated registered dietitian and licensed dietitian, RD and an LD, committed to promoting health and wellness through personalized nutrition, counseling, and education. With a strong background in dietetics, Michelle empowers her clients to make positive lifestyle changes that support their individual health goals. Her approach is rooted in evidence-based practices, ensuring that clients ensuring that clients receive the most current and effective nutrition guidance available. Whether working with clients to manage chronic conditions, achieve weight loss goals, or improve overall health, Michelle provides compassionate care and tailored recommendations to meet unique needs. With a passion for helping others discover the transformative power of nutrition, she's dedicated to making a difference in clients' lives. And Michelle, in my understanding, obviously your talk is titled The Role of Therapeutic Nutrition in Eating Disorder Treatment. My understanding, you're an expert in a couple of areas, particularly around binge eating and anorexia. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about that and kind of the areas that you focus in relating to addiction and eating disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have a background, like my health journey, began when I was 12. I was actually diagnosed with anorexia, was 5 feet tall, 57 and a half pounds. I apologize. I should figure out how to transfer that to the meters and kilograms, but very low weight. And so having been able to come out of that. And now, I use the standard American diet. I was in treatment. And even though I became weight restored, I had chronic anxiety, depression, relapsed, had all these issues. And so several years ago, when I had another personal health crisis, I became interested in, what's now known as like metabolic psychiatry. And I was just fascinated. It wasn't something that I was taught as a dietitian and the dietetic internship. And so, the approach that I take is kind of the opposite of what a lot of dietitians do. I don't believe that all foods fit all the time for all people. We know that certain foods, dramatically affect metabolism. So what I like to do is design a nutrition plan that is going to stabilize blood sugar, that is going to really help heal the brain, provide lots of neurotransmitters. Um, yeah, like I said, it's very different from our high carbohydrate, lots of processed foods. And I found if you don't address metabolism, and, I imagine, you guys would agree, you're asking for relapse, whether that's with an eating disorder, whether that's with an addiction. We've treated mental health illnesses purely like psychological illnesses, doing talk-based therapy and those things, which is great. But if we don't address metabolism, if we don't teach people how to eat in a way that's going to support metabolism, in my experience, we're just asking for, relapse.
So let's just unpack that a little bit. I'd love you to both respond to this, but of course, I think you've really summarized it, which is that traditionally mental health disorders and eating disorders have been seen as psychiatric conditions. So that, you work with psychiatrists, maybe a psychologist, and there's medication aspect to it. And it's been very pillared. Metabolic psychiatry has evolved and has come into the kind of foreground of the work that we're doing and has said, well, we need to be looking at these systems together. Of course, we've always known that we've looked at the gut and the brain, and we've connected the 2 points. But it feels like this is a transformational time where suddenly the pennies dropped, and as a kind of industry and healthcare are starting to realize that the metabolism and the psyche or the mind need to be treated together. So talk to me about that. Daria, maybe you want to start. What is metabolic psychiatry and why is it important?
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to start, and I'd like to really thank Michelle for opening up a discussion around ultra-processed foods and the fact that not all the foods are created equal and calorie is not calorie in terms of overall health and well-being when it comes to the connection between the biochemistry and the metabolic health and mental health. So that's precisely what metabolic psychiatry is focused on, is creating this sort of view of a person as a holistic machinery, and that all functions are sort of impacting each other, and they are all connected. So we cannot distinguish our hormonal health, metabolic health, gut health, as you exactly said, from our mental health and our feelings and how we feel. That's not a paradigm anymore. And that's exactly what metabolic psychiatry is focused on. And I really am grateful for Dr. Shabani that she pioneered this field. And she was, the psychiatrist who moved forward with the idea that we have to actually treat biochemical metabolic complexes first before digging into the psychology of some of the psychiatric illnesses, be it bipolar, schizophrenia, or binge eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia. Those are all having the biochemical background. Some of the neuropeptides Y, ghrelin, leptin, all influence the way how we eat. When it comes to metabolism, we look into foods first. It's not only food, but other substances and other things we do with our health that influence our biochemistry and metabolism. But food is the baseline. It comes first all the time. So that's why it is very important to treat biochemical things first, establish sort of a baseline of stability in the system, in many systems at the same time, and then move on with other psychological approaches to behavioral change, lifestyle change, and other coaching, aspects when it comes to treating pretty much any psychiatric disease.
So, well, Daria, that's quite a bold statement. So, what you're actually saying is we should look at diet before anything else with a psychiatric diagnosis. Michelle, do you agree? And
I do. I
I
love that statement. I absolutely do. And I love hearing, somebody who's studying medicine and has such a great background, in functional medicine say that. Because like she said, you have to establish that baseline. How we're approaching eating disorder treatment and many psychiatric illnesses right now is the opposite. We are feeding people here in the United States. If you go into a psychiatric facility, you're getting anywhere between 39 to 42 teaspoons of sugar a day in the meal plan they're providing you while we're giving you medication, while we're trying to do this therapy. And so we're doing it backwards. We're not actually addressing the metabolism. We're not stabilizing people. And we're wondering why people aren't getting better.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm just thinking back to, the decades of witnessing, particularly Ritalin, or that's what it's called in South Africa, and the kind of ADD, ADHD phenomenon in schools, and how it was diet's never been addressed as a kind of, the sugar, it's the correlation between sugar hadn't really been made back in the day, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So let's talk about that. I mean, what needs to change in diets? Like we understand now that we're kind of in an all-time mental health, I'm going to call it like a pandemic almost or an epidemic of mental health failure, mood disorders, psychiatric conditions. It's unprecedented. I mean, we cannot deny it's kind of living in the world. It's very difficult to find people who are not on medication for whether it's anxiety and depression or other psychiatric conditions. So what's wrong with our current lifestyles? Or, I mean, Daria, you said diet. You said we have to start a diet. So let's start with you and say, okay, well, what's wrong with our current diet and or lifestyles, and what needs to change? What is the solution for this crisis that you're proposing from a dietary perspective?
That's a very big question, but it's the most relevant that we have right now in our modern day society. And I would agree with you in calling it epidemic of mental health illnesses in general. We have this mismatch that I was talking about in my lecture between our genetic functionality and our just genes and our environment. I believe we're not equipped genetically or biopsychologically, anyhow, by any means, to deal with a modern day stressful life and all of the environmental factors that influence our not only biochemistry, but genetic and epigenetic components. So genetics plays a huge role in all of these factors, not only diet, but first, everything starts from the womb, it all starts from the women's health and then how it transforms into the health of a fetus. And then we have all of the rest, epidemics of ADHD when kids are on Ritalin since age 5 or something like that, as you mentioned. And then we move on into understanding, well, how do we deal with that right now with the rise of autism, bipolar disorders in kids specifically, starting from a young age? And I believe that diet has never been included into any discussion of whatsoever, let alone only psychiatric illnesses, but it has never found a connection within the classical medical framework of how to approach a diet intervention or how to have any kind of diet intervention in the formulas of treatment for any kind of disease, be it oncological, psychological, psychiatric, or other. Even when we talk about endocrine disorders, yes, we do talk a lot about diet there, but the emphasis on medication and treatment of endocrinological disorders with insulin, metformin, and other things, and right now Ozempic, is the baseline and it's the first line of intervention, whereas diet would be probably the last one or even overlooked. Because what happens is that doctors have minimal influence on how they can sort of advise, but then they are not able to trace how well a patient responds to a dietary treatment, the treatment with a specific diet. And it's almost impossible to oversee somebody from day one being adherent to a specific diet. So that's why there is always a connection between medication treatment, and it's the only thing we have right now in medicine as an effective solution to many, many things, especially psychiatric. But when it comes to diet, the interventions that we have to bring would be sort of integrative and coach-based and lifestyle-based. So that's where coaching comes into play in I believe, a very good scenario. So even psychiatrists and psychologists can do a great influence here with helping a client to adhere to a therapeutic diet. And that's exactly what metabolic psychiatry offers us, is an array of therapeutic dietary interventions and strategies to deal with specific conditions. We know a ketogenic diet is an extremely effective and good treatment for bipolar disorder. And we have a lot of studies right now going into understanding how precisely it works. But my field is addictology and specific to addictions. Here, it's very confusing and not studied well at the moment, but we have also solutions for it as well. So I think the classical medical framework and field needs to step up and gain more understanding and knowledge and practical implementations into how dietary interventions can be very effective. And other metabolic interventions too. It's not only diet, but we have an array of things that we employ.
It's so true what you're saying about, how medicine hasn't really included diet. Of course, Michelle, that's, I think that what there is there's this like, okay, we're going to hand this patient to the dietitian now. And then, like we're going to focus on their medication. Off they go to dietitian. The dietitian's going to give them a sheet. And is that correct in your clinical experience? And
Yes.
what needs to change? How does dietetics need to change? And then how does medicine need to change in order to include better dietary and behavioral change support?
Yeah, I think that was summed up so well. So like you said, unfortunately, doctors aren't focusing on nutrition or aren't focusing on specific therapeutic diets. They may give you some very general, like, you should eat better. You should eat more fruits and vegetables, something that is completely arbitrary and not helpful. And then say, oh, you're going to see the dietitian. But certainly here in the States, if you're seeing a dietitian, just depending if you're in, like an acute care center, you're going to get a minimal time, maybe 5 minutes. You might get more time if you're in an outpatient clinic, but they're going to go over the nutrition guidelines, which we know are not helpful. Very high carbohydrate, which obviously causes high insulin, high inflammation. They're going to tell you to eat all foods in moderation. They're going to give you a 1-page handout. And, the person usually says, okay, thanks. And then they leave. And then they're going to go back to doing whatever they were doing. We know, like here, like companies like Virta, who have been helping people reverse type 2 diabetes with ketogenic diets. The dietary change needs coaching. It needs follow-up. It's not something you can just hand a sheet to and say, go do it. Good luck. It's very difficult to change. And our modern food environment is not set up well for people to succeed. There's ultra processed foods everywhere. And people, when you have the nutrition experts, like dietitians saying, oh, it's fine, eat them in moderation, like that's not helpful, because we often see that these therapeutic diets require either complete elimination of processed foods, certainly it's, restriction of carbohydrates. So, what I would like to see is either ideally, you get doctors more educated on this topic and being able to direct people, at least give a basic direction, and then have the dietitian really be somebody who helps them break it down for their lifestyle, teach them, and not just give them a sheet and say, do this. Let's teach them why. Tell them what's happening in their body. Let's explain these hormones, insulin and, the peptide YY and ghrelin. Let's talk about what's happening in the brain. And let's talk about like why this is going to work. Because I feel like right now, medicine and dietitians is so disempowering. We're not helping people, we're not teaching people when we just give some of this very basic arbitrary advice with no long-term direction.
Sure. So what you're both saying is that we need to change behavior, and that there needs to be a lot more time or, kind of patient-centric, regular contacts to the approach. So how do we change behavior, and what is needed in terms of, kind of walking a patient in a more successful way through a dietary change? And I guess that applies to all chronic diseases, and in particular, here we're talking about mental health. So I guess it has different attributes and different areas that need focus, which is it might be more difficult to treat somebody who is binge eating as a symptomatic, relationship to depression, for example. What nuances are needed, and how do we actually have lasting behavioral change impacts on a patient? Daria, you're nodding, so I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, I love this question because I believe that the answer is multidisciplinary approach. It does have to be multidisciplinary, meaning involving many, many areas and many specialists at the same time to be effective. Yes, some people, depending on where they are and what they deal with. And I'm going to start to talk about addiction more from this moment on, because when it's said, when they need a radical change and when it's hard, the change is hard. Normally it's about addiction. Addiction and overcoming addiction is extremely hard, mentally and biochemically as well. It is wiring that sets you up for fail, for relapse, no matter what. So it is extremely complex and has to be dealt by a multidisciplinary team. And the support, the amount of support needed for that process is usually overlooked and underestimated. And normally it does happen so that we have regulations and we, give a person a sheet or some kind of recommendations, but it's exactly true that a person doesn't know how to approach actually doing whatever they've been told to do. And dealing with addiction, it is impossible because the amount of loss of control a person has doesn't let them correct their behavior just by wishing to correct. So no matter how much information they know, no matter how much sheets of regulations and steps that you give them of what they need to do, doesn't help them. So what helps them, and also the amount of therapy, psychotherapy will not help as long as the person is in active use, in active substance use or processed food use addiction, as we will now call it. And if I have time, I can chime in about the news that is happening in our field with the processed food use addiction, that we have a consensus now for that. And we hope that it will be included into the DSM-5 soon, I hope. So coming back to the fact that it's hard to stick to regulations and knowing what you do, because in the modern society and in the 21st century, everyone knows how to eat. It's no brainer that you have to eat less, exercise more, eat less junk food and things like that, or eat less carbs, ultra processed carbs. But why do people not do it? Why do people not adhere to this advice that's coming to them from every angle, from every corner? There is a reason for that. And the reason might be in addiction and in the relapse, in the withdrawal symptoms that are extremely hard to overcome, and in the complete loss of control of the amount a person is eating or the quality of the food they're eating. because of the impact of those foods on the person's biochemistry. So to unwrap all of this very hard biochemical and psychological aspects is virtually impossible on your own or with the help of just one modality, be it a diet. Like it's impossible to just stick to a diet for some limited amount of time, especially for low-calorie diet. It's very restrictive, it's hard, it's not sustainable over long term. But what's needed is a long-term solution that would be applied throughout the stages of somebody's life, be it, pre-puberty, then teenage, and then, fertile years, and then menopause, if we are talking about women, going through those cycles that are going to be also specific for the hormonal manifestations and biochemical as well is important. So yeah, it's a very hard topic, but where we have to start is individualized care, is acknowledgement. First, the acknowledgement, the awareness of the existence of the problem, of the ultra-processed foods is imperative. I think we cannot go on thinking that those foods are okay and they have to be unregulated and they have to be sold to anyone in unlimited numbers and be available in hospitals and in schools.
So thank you, Daria. It's such an important area that you brought in here. And I'm thinking to Michelle's talk of where she shares images of break rooms, vending machines, a couple of different points in your own life, I think, and in your work where there's just kind of this ultra-processed food environment so visibly engaged with patients. I mean, talk to us about what the landscape's like. You work, in my understanding, in a clinic. So what's it like there? What are patients exposed to? And what needs to be done to actually, if we're saying addiction is the problem, is healthcare gearing itself in better ways? What needs to be done more actively? It feels like we're heading in a direction where we're putting people into, we're saying to people they've got an addiction and they need to reverse it, and then kind of from their hospital bed they can see the vending machine. Are we setting people up for failure? And how are we actually going to walk them through this change that needs to happen in a way that allows them to succeed?
Yeah, well, I think the problem, like you said, the very first problem is we don't talk about food addiction. And when I became a dietitian in 2009, and even today, if you go into a hospital, most dietitians would tell you food addiction does not exist. It's made up. It's an excuse for people to overeat. So, I mean, that's clearly where I would start, is just being able to acknowledge, like, yeah, this is a big problem, and we have the evidence. We have very good evidence that ultra processed foods, they not only shift hormones, causing that blood sugar rise and insulin and blood sugar crash, which makes you crave more. They actually alter the neurotransmitters in your brain. Dr. Georgia Ede was the first person to really introduce to me that, and actually consuming a lot of ultra processed foods over time, be it cookies, crackers, soda, can actually prevent your brain from engaging in neuroplasticity. Like it basically prevents you from coping with stress or being able to make changes. And if we're dealing with somebody with an eating disorder or an addiction, they absolutely need to be able to make behavioral changes. So these processed foods are potentially preventing the person from being able to, participate in their own recovery. So, I always thought that a hospital should be a place of absolute healing. Just like I feel like a dietitian, a nutrition expert should be somebody who's giving you the very best nutrition advice possible. But especially, in the States, it feels like it's the opposite. I mean, you literally can't go anywhere without being exposed to processed foods. Yeah, I was literally driving down the road, 100 meters from my house, and there's a banner for soda at a gas station. My veterinary clinic where I take my dog, they have a hot chocolate free vending machine. Home repair store has all these ultra processed foods. And it's the same thing in hospitals. A type 2 diabetic in a hospital can get up to 90 grams of carbs, sometimes more. They can order sugary coffee drinks, cookies, waffles, all these things. So you have this huge disconnect. You have people like me and like you guys saying, hey, we have to address this. We have to get rid of processed foods because it's literally destroying your metabolism. It's preventing you from recovering. It's preventing you from having that life that you want to have. Like it is multifaceted, but we have to start there. But if I'm saying that and you guys are saying that, but then they go into these institutions and there's all this ultra processed food, I think it causes kind of a disconnect.
Mm. Yeah, it's a very difficult time to be a patient and to be a dietitian and to be a doctor.
As a patient, you have to advocate for yourself. If you don't say, I do not want those, they will serve them to you.
I'm thinking back to it. I was in hospital in America for 2 days after fainting on a flight a couple of years ago, and I didn't eat the food for 2 days. And eventually, my sister flew in from Denver to New York and brought me food because the physician phoned her and said, "We think your sister's anorexic," and I'm certainly not. But there was just nothing accessible to me that I was able to eat. It was such a shock to me, just how processed and how unpalatable and unhealthy the foods were. So, Michelle, I want to stay with you because, of course, we've been talking a lot about binge eating, addictive eating. In your talk, you bring in both binge eating disorder and anorexia, so kind of malnourished eating. Talk to us about how those are both, or how anorexia and the treatments of it can be associated with the ketogenic diet and carbohydrate restriction, because it's almost like we're looking at two opposite problems with one solution.
Yeah, and they seem very opposite, right? Because you have somebody generally, if they're struggling with anorexia, they are very underweight. And then potentially somebody struggling with binge eating disorder, they tend to be either a normal weight or even overweight. And the dogma right now that most dietitians and medical professionals and most therapists would tell you is you can't ask somebody with a dysfunctional relationship with food to restrict food. You can't ask somebody with anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder to cut out processed carb, even cut out ultra processed food, because that will exacerbate the problem. That's what I was taught as a young dietitian. That's what most dietitians would tell you. But as we're talking about, that is looking at these disorders as psychiatric disorders and not metabolic psychiatric disorders. So if we don't, address the metabolism, we're going to continue to have these issues, in my opinion. I like to think of, to try to easily conceptualize this, thinking about the medical disorder epilepsy. Babies are born with epilepsy. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't eat a lot of ultra processed foods. They just have a, genetic and metabolic abnormality in the brain where they do not process glucose well. And if they are fed like a formula that has glucose and carbohydrates, they will have seizures. But if you feed them ketogenic formula, or, and interestingly, breast milk is ketogenic, they don't seize, or for the most part, do very well. And what we're seeing in these psychiatric disorders, be it like bipolar disorder, there's actually a clinical trial going on right now for anorexia and ketogenic diets, is we see people doing very well, and once again, are they just not able to utilize glucose very well in the brain? I think that's a possibility. I think when you remove a lot of the ultra processed carbohydrates and you're feeding people nutrient dense, proteins and fats, you stabilize blood sugar. You keep insulin low. Just doing that, just simply stabilizing blood sugar is very powerful for preventing anxiety. And then you're also getting all this, the brain needs certain vitamins, minerals, and cofactors. You need B12, you need zinc. So all of a sudden you're feeding people in a way that, in my opinion, humans were supposed to eat. You're eating more of a primal ancestral diet. So the brain starts working well. Blood sugar is stabilized. Inflammation is low. And then all of a sudden, and Dr. Sati Shabani, she was just saying, showed this in binge eating disorder. They published a really brilliant case study with 3 individuals who had complete remission when eating in this way. So, to me, and I've seen it obviously with several people with anorexia, and it's interesting because, one of the main problems with anorexia is people go into treatment, they eat the standard American ultra processed diet, they gain weight. And, my experience having gone through this as a young person is you just feel awful. Your anxiety is at an all-time high. You're shaky, dizzy, feel terrible. So as soon as you get out of treatment, you restrict. You just don't want to feel so awful. You don't want to feel so terrible and anxious. So let's feed people in a way where they feel better, where they're calm, where their brain is functioning, where their body is not aching. And just doing that, and the brain is working. The brain is all of a sudden, doing what it's supposed to do. And of course, I know, it is multifaceted. You probably need some other, therapies and things. But if we can just get people to a baseline where they can start to heal, and I believe that starts with nutrition, I think we're going to have so much more success.
Oh, beautiful. So can you share with us your own journey, or would you be prepared to share with us a little bit of summary of your own journey? It's quite unusual for a dietitian to have found this route through their own personal experiences and now bringing it into the work that you do in such a proactive and interesting way.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, when I was 12, I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was 5 feet tall, 57.5 pounds, BMI slightly under 11. And I went to inpatient treatment for 2 months and was put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. I mean, that's another thing we could talk about. The tube feeding formulas. I mean, back then they were corn syrup, maltodextrin, canola oil, soy protein. Today, they're pretty much the same thing. That's amazing. 28 years later, they're still highly inflammatory. Was put on 7 different medications. Was basically told like I didn't have a really good shot to survive. But if I did, I remember the doctor telling me, people with anorexia do not recover. You will always be dealing with obsessive thoughts around food. You will dealing with, probably pain. They told me I might not grow anymore. Like I said, I was 5 feet tall then. And it was just basically saying like, this is your new life lot. You're going to deal with depression. You're going to deal with anxiety. You're going to do all these things. So I remember thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to have to become this like high functioning person with all these issues. And for the most part, they were right. I became weight restored, but through my adolescence and early adulthood, I struggled. I constantly had periods of, severe anxiety and recently as 2017, I was dealing with suicidal ideation, and I wanted to become a dietitian because I felt like if I could understand what was going on, maybe I could help heal my brain and help other people. But as I went through the dietetics program, as we've been talking about, it is, diet here in the States, dietitian school is heavily sponsored by processed foods. So it doesn't matter if you're dealing with a mental illness, if you have kidney failure, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, we are prescribing you the food pyramid, highly processed carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, keep it low fat, sugar in moderation. And that's been a total health disaster. The number one cause of disability worldwide is depression. So, as I became a dietitian, I was really sad and angry. It just seemed like my patients were not doing well. People were getting worse. And during that time, I became an athlete. I became a long distance runner. And then in 2019, I was actually trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So I was training really hard, and it just felt like my body wasn't recovering well. At that point, I was eating over 350 grams of carbohydrates a day and lots of, sugar and things I thought I needed as an athlete. And I just, all of a sudden, like I said, my body hurt. So I reached out to a few dietitians and they told me, oh, you need more carbohydrates. Really, more? I'm eating so much. But I was dedicated, like, all right, let's do it. So I ended up eating about 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. And as you can imagine, that made things quite a bit worse. I would go for a run and like break out in a cold sweat. I wasn't sleeping well. I had to call into work. I was having panic attacks. And then I just remember coming home from work one day and falling asleep on the couch and waking up in the middle of the night and just like everything hurt. So I went to our gas station, got a bunch of ice, put it in the bathtub, and was doing an ice bath at like 3 a.m. And that's when I decided I'm done. I'm never running again. This is it. I need to change. And I just intuitively knew all these carbohydrates weren't making me feel well. But all of my education, all my training, all my time as a dietitian, I'd been told that I need them. But I figured since I wasn't running, I might as well follow a low carbohydrate diet. And, fast forward, my health improved so dramatically that I ended up, publishing a book, and I had access. I was working at a hospital to all these case studies. And I was floored by how much evidence we have for ketogenic diets and specifically type 2 diabetes. And thankfully now we're having more for ketogenic diets and mental illness. And I was excited. I was naive. I thought, oh, I'm going to be able to talk about this and preach this and practice this in the hospital. And I was immediately told, oh no, absolutely not. Um, and so, it was the first time in my dietitian career that I actually saw people heal, utilizing this advice. I mean, I had people that were diabetic for 30 years, and talking with, the individuals like Dr. Eric Westman and Dr. Ben Bickman, they were getting people off 150 units of insulin in a week and a half. So from there, it's like once you once you see the light, you can't go back. You can't. I couldn't go back to that same hospital setting, and so, like I said, I'm very grateful. And through this time and this advocacy, I've seen these lower carbohydrate, the higher fat animal based diets just across the board, whether it's mental illness or with eating disorders. Like, we're just seeing people get better, and so I find that very encouraging. But I find the fact that we aren't changing how we practice or teach, and the roadblocks we're coming up against, and even trying to talk about that, that's that's a little discouraging.
Oh, it's an amazing story and journey that you've been on. Daria, I'm interested in hearing your view. You've come from a much less regulated environment, and you've kind of built your own coaching practice, and now you're going into medicine with this kind of toolkit, suit of armor on. So you're going to kind of take this work that you're doing now, and of course be a part of the change that we all are. Talk to us about what you're doing currently and how you are treating clients with addiction.
Exactly. You've explained it very well, that it sounds counterintuitive for me to go back to the highly regulated system where I wouldn't be able, or so to say, to practice what I preach. But I'm hopeful for future. I know that these changes are coming, and with what we have and with the evidence that we have for ultra-processed foods being addictive, I am confident that it will get into the DSM-5 and be accepted officially. So when we have the diagnosis, an official diagnosis, the framework will change, and we will have to develop treatment strategies, assessment tools, diagnostic tools. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do at the moment, to be ahead of the time and to formulate my own assessment protocols and diagnostic tools. And being in medical school lets me do that. I am involved in writing research and writing papers on food addiction. And I'm trying to establish like a little course in my faculty, on the faculty where I study, together with other professors, and to have like a little course for medical students on addiction, on food addiction specifically. And before we have an official diagnosis, it's impossible to envision like an official course and for these studies to be included into the official medical studies. But for now, we will have like a course that that students can join. It's like an add-on course. But when it becomes official, I am envisioning that I will try to bring this change and create like a separate course in the medical university for students to learn this officially. And I am trying to establish a society for ultra-processed food addiction or just food addiction. I'm not sure yet of how to approach this change that we got and how to see the future ahead of us. But the times are, the things are changing, and I'm very hopeful that we will see a radically different future from now on, especially when we have so much AI right now and all the technologies that help us to reach people who are struggling with food addiction and with other addictions with ease. So we've seen during COVID times that an online-based strategies and treatments were pretty much as effective as one-on-one therapies with be it psychologists or other psychotherapists. So I think all of the strategies are highly accessible to people. And when it becomes official, it will be totally another story. And I'm hopeful that it will become soon.
So just on that note, there's a lot of lovely engagement in the live. Thank you so much. I can't see it here, but Sabrina's sharing it with me in the back end. Nelda, hi Nelda. So good to see that you're online. Apparently Nelda said what fantastic news that this will be included in the DSM-5. So that's good to hear that everyone else is excited about that. I'm mindful of time. I want to ask you each to please just share with me and with us what you're going to be talking about on the new training. You're each giving a really, really amazing lecture. I've listened to them both in the last couple of days. Let's start with you, Daria, because you're still there with us.
Yes, I'm here. I'll just continue my line of thought about the fact that addiction is a highly complex pathology to treat and to address. And within this new emergent field of food addiction, the first thing is awareness and developing the right criteria, the diagnostic criteria, and for the practitioners to be aware about the fact that addiction is not only addiction to substances and chemical substances, but also behavioral addictions. We call them process addictions. They are as well a part of the story and they exist. And food is very interesting in the way that it's both a chemical addiction because we have an agent that causes an addictive response, which is highly processed foods loaded with processed fructose and sugar. And it's also process addiction, meaning behavioral addiction, because engaging in the process of eating is addictive on its own, and it does share some similarities with eating disorder paradigm, but it is addressed in a completely radically different way. So coming from the biochemical perspective. And that's what I'm unpacking in my lecture is how to actually approach this from the coaching perspective, because coaching on the level of stabilization of a client after they've gone through detox, maybe utilizing some of the medical strategies that their doctor implemented. I would imagine a ketogenic diet or low carb diet, or even if it's type 2 diabetes, then medication is necessary at some point, at least in the beginning, or it might be not. But coaching comes into play on those first stages as well, and it's a critical moment of helping the client to acknowledge that it's not a problem of their personality. It's not who they are, because due to the fact that processed foods or their behaviors or other addictions as well, because usually what happens is we have an addiction interaction disorder or cross addiction or poly addictions. It means that we are dealing not only with one type of addiction, for example, to food, but also at the same time to alcohol or nicotine or other substances. So all of these things have to be have to be covered by a medical professional and the team. But also we would need to establish the right kind of plan of action of how to approach which addiction first, and then ultimately all of them at the same time, because it doesn't matter what are you addicted to. Addiction is addiction. Once you stop or quit one thing, you might as well develop another addiction to another thing. So all of these things are getting complex, and coaches and other professionals are helpful to help a client to not go into other addiction, to be mindful of the proactive approach to relapse prevention or to addiction transfer prevention. So all of these things are some of the things we utilize, and I do in my practice. And it does bring a lot of result when the diet also comes into play, and the dietary interventions are also utilized, because when we talk about classical addictions or substance use disorders, it is highly known, and there is a huge correlation between the fact that when a person is quitting nicotine, for example, they develop some kind of overeating problems, and they gain lots of weight. So that's some of the things that I also underline in my talk, that we have to be mindful of when we do rehab work or addiction treatment, is to implement the dietary strategies for addiction treatment to prevent relapse for any kind of addiction, not only food addiction, but any addiction and other substance use disorders.
Such a good point. I'm thinking of the many people I know that have gone into drug or alcohol rehab and then have come out like significantly heavier and chain smoking, and it's quite shocking. It's like it often feels like they've kind of been given an alternative addiction rather than a solution. Daria, thank you. That is I loved your talk, your lecture, and I learned a lot from it. So I'm really, really excited for those of you that are listening to have an opportunity to these amazing talks. Michelle, your lecture, tell us a little bit about it. The title is The Emerging Role of Therapeutic Nutrition in Eating Disorder Treatment. Can you give us a little sneak peek summary of what you'll be talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, I outline what we're doing right now for eating disorder treatment. And it's what we've been doing for, several decades. And just trying to really show how this is very ineffective. It's interesting to me. That's literally the definition of insanity, right? We're doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Also, here in the States, eating disorder treatment is not regulated in the sense that you can go somewhere maybe in one part of the United States and get this type of treatment, and it might be totally different somewhere else. And so I really want to talk about and show what is happening in the body and in the brain. Once again, on this metabolism, what is going on a metabolic level when we feed people with eating disorders the standard American diet, the current prescription. So just so people can really understand, like, oh my goodness, how could that possibly work? Because it's not working. And then going through, the alternative solution. Also, I really wanted to address some of the unique things that are happening on a metabolic level with somebody potentially with binge eating disorder, anorexia. It seems like common sense that the gut is damaged if you've been restricting or binging and purging. But that is often not looked at or taken into account, by many medical professionals or dietitians. And then, outlining what way of eating is going to, help the gut heal, stabilize blood glucose, and help the brain heal. Because once again, if we can't heal the brain, if we can't eat in a way that is going to allow people to think clearly and adopt new behaviors, in my opinion, we're just spinning our wheels. So I also give a few some testimonies, some case studies, and they're very powerful. People that were either extremely overweight, had tried so many different things and could not stop binging. And I think they outlined just how powerful processed foods are. I had one woman say that she was told that she would know she was well when she could eat all foods in moderation. And so that line of thinking really kept her sick and obese and depressed. And so trying to help health professionals and dietitians look at things differently, be open to, if a way of eating is part of helping you heal, we have to stop calling this restrictive. We need to start calling this liberating, a miracle, a prescription potentially. So, I was honored to do the presentation. I really hope it helps a lot of people.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I think that, listening to your lecture, the feeling I got was hope. My son's a teenager. We're kind of seeing, the manifestation of eating disorders that he's at that age where it's presenting itself, and it's just that feeling of hopelessness, knowing the kind of standard of care that early, teen anorexics are going to face, and then of course the opposite extreme of that, which is binge eaters. And it feels like with kind of people like the two of you in the healthcare system, and I know of course the thousands of you that are out there that have done our trainings, there's a chance that at least a good majority, or good, I'm not going to say majority, a minority, but it's still a percentage at this point of patients are going to get advice that's going to give them a chance. And, I think the truth is that mental health and psychiatric conditions are very, very serious. You talked about how anorexia is one of the main causes of death from a psychiatric disease perspective. Of course, we know suicide rates are at an all-time high. Untreatable depression and anxiety are at an all-time high. Things are bad out there, and it's pretty scary. And what we also know is that the medication route has failed so many people that we know and love, and that the people that are offering it are feeling hopeless themselves, struggling to support patients to get better. So we're hoping that through this kind of introductory training, Metabolism in the Mind, through the Nutrition Network, we will equip healthcare practitioners across the spectrum with a deeper understanding of the intricate relationship between metabolic processes and mental health, and enable just more effective solutions and treatment paths for them to explore in, of course, much more detail. It's a bit like a bouquet of flowers in terms of the different solutions that are available. It's one of our typical elective trainings, so it has a variety of topics of interest. We've got Dr. Rob Sywers talking about autism spectrum disorder. We've got Denise Potter talking about the ketogenic metabolic therapy for mental health and giving practical applications for it. She's also a dietitian and a nutritionist. We've got Dong Augustino, who's giving a lecture on dietary strategies and biomarker monitoring to improve metabolic and mental health. So some of the interesting stuff from his lab at the moment. The amazing Bitten Johnson, who is such an inspiration to many around the work she does in addiction. Her talk is titled "What if Sugar is Causing You Energy Depletion, Feelings of Dread and Anxiety, and How to Heal," which is such an important topic for our times. Daria, we've talked about yours. We've got Dr. Shabani Sethi, who's giving a talk called Metabolic Psychiatry, and she's specifically honing in on the ketogenic diet and its application for serious mental illness. Really, really an amazing lecture. Tamsin Murphy, our own Nutrition Network dietitian, is talking about the ketogenic diet as a treatment for anxiety, and a very, very fascinating and beautiful case study that she shares. We've got Ignacio Curanata, Dr. Ignacio, who's presenting on metabolic conditions and stress, 10 lessons from clinical practice, another amazing lecture. The amazing psychiatrist, Dr. Laurie Calabrese, her lecture is titled The Ketogenic Diet for Depression and Anxiety Disorders, New Beginnings. She's making a lot of waves in the metabolic psychiatry. We've got Beth Zupek-Kanya, who's an RDN. From her topic is From Farm to Farm. So farm as in farmer to farm. What does the medical professional need to know about treating psychiatric disorders with a ketogenic diet? We've got you, Michelle, and we've also got a really, really lovely panel interview with a group of people from the Bozuki Foundation and Metabolic Mind. So such a variety. I get so excited when I look at our topics and the breadth and the minds that go into our trainings. So much gratitude to the two of you for your amazing lectures and to all of the lecturers on this training. There's a little bit of a series coming up, so I think I'm the first of three. I think Tamsin and Dr. Hesina Kaji are also going to be interviewing a couple of the other lecturers over the next week or so. The training launches, bear with me, let me just get my dates fully correct, at the end of this month. And there is a discount. I believe it's until the 26th of this month. There's about a 20 or 30% discount. That's like an early bird if you pre-order the training. So if you know you want to do it, sign up before it goes live and you get that discount. There's also, we have already got two really, really noteworthy trainings within our stable at the Nutrition Network. The one is called Addictive Eating, which is about addiction and sugar and food addiction. And it really kind of couples beautifully with this training. I think it's almost like a precursor to this training. We also have a module, an elective module that's on neurological disease that ties in. So I was just chatting to the team earlier, and what we'll probably do is put together like a mind bundle with those three really, really interesting and different but the same areas. So thank you both so much for your time today. For those of you listening, I hope you got excited about the training with me and got to know a little bit more about the amazing work that Daria and Michelle are doing in their different areas. And yeah, hope to see you both a lot more and hear a lot more of your voices in the coming months, and just really, really looking forward to the landing of this training and how it positively impacts healthcare workers and professionals and their clients' lives. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you
lovely
so
day.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. Wow. Thank you. Have a good
You're
day.
welcome. You as well.
So good to see you both.
Yes,
Thank
I also
you.
have so much gratitude to be a part of it. Anytime I have an ability to speak about
Exactly.
awareness of food addiction, I'm really honored. It's something that I'm passionate about beyond
You're
one
both
can
so amazing
imagine.
and clear. I was just thinking, listening to both of you, like, gosh, we got to hear more of you. Like, it's just,
I
you've
know.
got
How do
such
we like multiply
potential.
us times a million,
Yeah,
right?
how do we do this like every day? Like, get
Yeah.
the message in there. Let's keep